Senzeni. How are you, Senzeni?
I'm okay. I'm just trying to get ready.
We're happy there's no load shedding. Even in Cape Town, there's no load shedding. The rest of South Africa.
Too bad.
No, I have these power banks.
Yeah.
So even if load shedding comes, I've got everything plugged on the power banks.
Are you really?
Okay.
Even internet?
Eh?
Then how does it doesn't affect internet?
No, we're using, we've taken the SIM card out of the device. If I go on another phone, just in case it might go off. So I had to be prepared just in case lights go off.
Always. If you're here in Mzanzi, you have to be prepared for that.
But aren't we lucky? Actually, the whole week, there's no load shedding in the entire country.
Well, it's coming tonight, 9.
Yes,
released this.
The timing is brilliant.
It's waiting to be done.
So it's there almost.
Before we go any further, Kensani Mkari.
Hello, Kensani.
Danny.
My earphones, because I'm using a cell phone.
Okay, that's fine.
You work for BKHZ, Vanilla Cosa Gallery.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he's now moved to Cape Town. You're gonna go.
Yeah, and I'm working for A4 now, so yeah, I need to be Vanilla Cosa's curator, and then now I've moved here and I'm working for an NPO, which is quite nice. I don't have to worry about commercial things, which is liberating.
Yeah, no, of course that can be a relief.
Yeah, selling art is hard.
Yes, it is. It is terribly difficult, and
yeah.
I think people who can do it and do it very well, she might take my head off.
That's true. But you have to worry about quotas. Yeah, we have to pay rent. We have to. It's not.
Yeah,
easy.
that's another thing.
Yeah,
I think.
No, I'm listening.
No, I think it was mine. I just touched Prizm, so I was just checking what's going on.
Okay, no, that's fine. But you were saying?
No, I'm saying that's why I probably ran away from my MA in curatorial studies. I did the coursework. When it came to writing the long paper, I just went missing in action. Never did the long paper. But I did all the museum work, gallery work, learning the logistics. And then I realized, gosh, this is not for me. That I am fine being a practicing artist.
Yeah.
I'll probably do that for the rest of my life. I'm glad for what it taught me, because now I don't have a gallery in South Africa that is. So I have 2 solo shows in 2022 in Jag and in Vets.
Ah, that's fantastic.
And I'll have to curate those spaces myself.
Oh, I see. So, are you gonna go there, because we're red listed? Organjan, I'm saying, are you gonna have to go there to those spaces?
Oh yeah, no, they're allowing people in. I think it's only January where now it's.
Mandatory vaccination. Traveling is. There's a friend who's supposed to be in South Africa from Switzerland. She couldn't fly. She's not even South African, so they stopped. They're stopping anyone who's coming to South Africa, even foreigner.
Yeah, because I landed here on Sunday. From the Netherlands. Yeah, from Enschede. I'm curating an exhibition there called Mesava. It's a time-based medium or durational medium exhibition. Also all video. I have an artist from Brazil, an artist from Hawaii, 2 artists from Zimbabwe, and then the rest of the artists are from here in South Africa. And all of them are showing works, video-based works. gaming and digital arts festival. So the moment I landed there, we were red listed. You know, they were like, yeah, Omicron, don't. And I almost got a heart attack because I was like, am I going to be able to come back home? Because I'm starting this new job and I had said, I'm going to come back on this date, you know? So I was like, I don't want to be stuck here.
No, but if your destination or a passport holder of the destination, they allow you to go.
They have to let you back home.
Yeah, they let you fly back home. So
I'm happy to
it
be
would not
back.
have been a problem. Yeah, it would not have been a problem for you in particular.
Yeah.
But I think because there's a lot of white people who just who were trying to fly to Canada today with their British passports. I get
Could they fly? Because apparently they took
half of them did. The rest are still stuck at the airport.
Oh, okay.
And they want to, because the UK won't allow it's expensive to go to the UK, or you have to stay on the quarantine hotel for 14 days.
Exactly.
So they and then in Canada it's free to quarantine. So they were trying to go to Canada, quarantine there for free, and then fly back to UK. And it's crazy. It's crazy.
Hello.
Okay.
Hey, Darren. Okay. Oh,
Okay,
hand of the flip off. Go into the pen mode. Andile is not here yet, eh? I've sent him a message. No, I've called him. No response.
Hopefully people are doing this joining us online. Let me know.
Testing.
Okay. Okay. Let me know when we're ready.
Sending him a message, no response.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our final day of Prizm panels for our 9th edition of the fair. Thank you for joining us on this Saturday afternoon. Today we will be having a conversation on cultural praxis that will be led by Gia Hamilton, who is the Executive Director and Chief Curator at the New Orleans African American Museum. Today's presentation is brought to you by our event partners, the Green Family Foundation, the Miami Department of Cultural Affairs, the Florida Division of Cultural Affairs, Diasporic, and the Knight Foundation. I will hand it off to Gia to present our panelists this afternoon.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm super excited to be here in Miami from New Orleans. There's certainly lots and lots and lots of connections between these two places, and so it's a real honor for us to shift our sort of gaze and our understanding of contemporary art way down south to the global south in South Africa. And I'd like to welcome our panelists for today. The first panelist is Senzeni Marasala, who is an artist and educator in South Africa. Next, hello. Good to see you. Next, we'll bring in Tuli Malambo James, who is an independent curator and the proprietor of the Ujamaa Arts Center. And I'm going to wave everybody in and say hello. And next, we'll bring in Kinsani Makara, who is a multidisciplinary artist and curator. And finally, Andali Menengale, and I'm sorry, you may have to pronounce that for me again, who is the curator and co-founder of the Black Collective Forum. Let's see if I can see all four of you at the same time. Are you all able to hear? Yeah?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. And can we raise the volume just so that I can hear the panelist? If you can hear me, can you give a little wave? Yes?
We can hear you.
Excellent.
I know I can hear you. I'm here.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Excellent. So happy to have you all with us virtually in Miami. I feel like your presence is here. So thank you both so much. So I want to get started today because we're, again, taking this trip from Miami all the way down south to South Africa. And I was hoping that you all could start by telling us a little bit about your journey in your creative practice, either as an artist, a curator, or arts worker.
Wants to go first. Senzeni, would you like to go first?
I like volunteers.
No, it's fine. I'll volunteer. I'm an artist, a multimedia artist, working in Soweto, just outside of Johannesburg, and I live in Soweto by choice, because I think it has a lot of influence, I think, in my work and the reasons why I produce art. And then occasionally I teach, which would be like 3 months every year, but the rest of the time is dedicated to studio work and developing my performance art. I do durational performance work, and then I choose to archive my ideas or the residues of the performances in fabric. Yes.
Excellent, thank you, welcome. Who's
Thank
next?
Tuli's next. I'll go last.
Okay, so I guess it's a ladies first kind of situation. I joined, I don't know where to start. I didn't study art, but I got into the arts industry because I had friends, or I still have friends in the arts industry, and I started out by doing lounge exhibition or dining room type of exhibitions. We'll have dinner and then have artworks hanging. And I then moved into working as a director for one of the well-known art institutions in Johannesburg, the Back Factory Artist Studios. Upon resigning a year later with the hope of establishing myself career-wise to do an MA in art management and cultural policy at Goldsmiths University in London. Unfortunately, due to financial constraints, I had to defer. And that is when I established my business, Ujamaa Arts, which focuses on giving artists a platform, both emerging and established artists, to sort of try and find a platform for them in continuation in what they're doing. And also, I do so much other than that. We're also working on ideas, conceptualization, etc.
Excellent, thank you so much, Tuli.
Yeah, I'm Ken Sanim Kari. We're currently in Cape Town right now,
Yes.
in Greenpoint. I just actually moved here. I'm an art curator, multidisciplinary artist, researcher, teacher. So I have a kind of rhizomatic practice that sort of, it's like a map, it feeds into itself, sort of like a feedback loop. I currently work as an assistant curator at A4 Art Foundation, That's like my new job. That's why I moved here. I used to work for a Black-owned gallery in Johannesburg, founded by an artist called Vanilla Koza. Yeah, and I have my own practice. Latest work, I'm showing work in Enschede in the Netherlands. I'm showing an exhibition called Masava, initially commissioned by Fagugezi Digital Innovation Festival, which is a digital arts festival in South Africa that happens annually. So I was asked by the Overkill Festival, which was founded by Sick House, to curate a physical iteration of the exhibition. Yeah, I also teach and do work, and I'm currently working on my dissertation titled Journey, which is a sci-fi novel. Yeah, that's what I'm up to right now. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So let's start there because you mentioned that you just moved. So if you all were going to set the tone for the South African contemporary art scene, where would those epicenters be? Where are the hubs, and who is doing work in those hubs?
I mean, generally, like for the longest time, it has always been like Johannesburg and Cape Town. But lately, we see a lot of artists coming out from Durban. You know, like, I mean, we have Zanele Moholi, who just did a retrospective at the Tate. I think they're doing something in Germany right now. I don't remember the institution's name. We have Wanda Buche, who's one of the most, like, in terms of escalation, they're like one of the most priciest artists, if I may use the word priciest, to like sort of acquire. And then we have Stenjwa Lutuli, who's an upcoming artist within art spaces that did like very well at ACA Art Fair recently. And they're actually showing as part of Miami Basel right now. They're showing monumental works. I did a studio visit. So I would say those are like the three places. I don't know, Senzeni, if you would agree, but I think Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban are holding it down right now, with Durban being the latest addition to the ecosystem.
And there's KZNSA, which is also exhibiting at the Prizm Art Fair, which is from Durban.
From Durban, yeah.
And so talk to me a little bit about how the arts ecosystem sort of bubbles up to the surface, right? Like how does that happen there where new art scenes emerge? Is it because primarily of migration? Are there other reasons, resources? What are the reasons that something would sort of start to be a burgeoning art scene in South Africa?
Are you asking me?
Whoever wants to.
Yeah, I think Senzeni can answer that.
Absolutely, please.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make an attempt to answer. You know, I think there is a space. What do you call this? Instagram. You know, that I think is much more heavily occupied by South African artists than any other space. You know, and this is including galleries as well. And you must remember that galleries here, commercial ones that are working and that have outreach and also travel to do art fairs all over the world. There's so few of them, you know, that a lot of artists, you know, have found alternative spaces, you know, which are online, you know, namely your Instagram, and some are on website, and even now TikTok. There's a lot of artists who are attempting to work on TikTok or show their work on TikTok. I think for, I mean, some of the largest biennales that we have had, I think when we go back to the ones that were curated by Okwi early in the Okwi and Wenza, the late, early in the 90s, you know, very massive biennales. So I think from then there was something quite exciting that was starting to happen, because, you know, I think previously, because this country was so closed up culturally because of the systems at the time, that there was such a hype around Joburg, you know, this all-African city, this transitory space, for so many years, you know, that I think the last 4 to 5 years, then moved to Cape Town, the Investec Art Fair, which became quite big. You know, and we were hoping that it would be much larger, but then COVID happens the last 2 years. that again forces artists to find alternative ways of working. We've seen a lot of shows online. So if I were to think about spaces which artists occupy, I would say online at the moment.
Yeah, and Tanzania, to dovetail off of what you're saying, I mean, last year Fagugezi did the curatorial commission, and they were particularly focused on digital art and art that's showcased online. So as a curator, the challenge was to show artworks using the internet, you know, and you mentioning social media and TikTok and, you know, websites. So for that, like, I created an exhibition called Masava, which explored how to use indigenous interfaces, such as the Dikenga cosmogram. So it's like the Bantu Congo cosmogram, which sort of situates the 4 moments of the sun. You know, so it's sort of like, how do we create interfaces that are localized, that can show African art, whether it's time-based mediums or durational mediums, online? You know, so that has posed a challenge that I think has sort of prompted a lot of creativity from artists.
Yes.
You know, where like Instagram and TikTok and such have become sort of almost primary options in terms of like giving and showing the world your art. And I think it has done a lot for artists, because you get a lot more independent artists that can sell their work using the DM, which I think is fantastic, you know, because it's sort of like bypasses the mediation, the mediation of the gallery, you know, which I think is good for artists, because they get their fair share of what they deserve, you know.
Absolutely. And so just thinking about even just the local gallery scene, museums, and institutions, right? I have an independent curatorial practice, but I'm currently working at the New Orleans African American Museum to revitalize it. And I know that traditionally, museum spaces are sort of riddled with hierarchy, lots of sort of red tape, and a lack of sort of transparency in general about how artists actually enter into a museum space. What is that seen, and what has happened in terms of just partnerships between independent curators, artists, and institutions in South Africa? Are you seeing sort of some different methodology and different relationships that are building, or is there still sort of a clinging to the sort of old way of doing things? Tuli, do you
I don't think, what I'm finding is that people are finding ways of doing things differently, you know? And there are still institutions or people or curators that are still clinging to the old-fashioned ways of doing things. And some of us, like myself, have found a way to sort of bypass the old-fashioned. Oh, hi, Andile.
Andile.
Lovely to have you. Welcome.
Oh, you're on mute, Andile.
Andile, you're on mute. Your speaker, your microphone.
You're muted.
And for those of you who are just joining us, we're going to welcome our newest panelist. Welcome, and I think we would love to see your face if you're available.
Yeah, he's there.
Okay.
Maybe
you see my face?
Repeat the question.
So we've been talking a little bit about the arts ecosystem and the relationship between sort of the independent artists, curators, and the institutions and the galleries, right? The commercial world, and what that relationship looks like now, right? In a world where we've all just experienced a global pandemic. So what are some of the ways that artists are sort of reclaiming power, restructuring their lives, and how are the institutions and the galleries responding to that in South Africa? Andile, it's great to see your face. Thank you for joining us.
I'm not too sure whether we are on a different time zone, because I thought we started at 8, but anyway, thank you for. It's a pleasure to join everyone.
Thank you. So what are your thoughts? You know, you're doing this work as a curator and actually founding what is a local institution. What are your thoughts on the relationships between sort of formal institutions like museums, commercial institutions like galleries, and artists and curators now that, you know, we've entered into this new wave of digital platforms and a lot more independence? How are museums and galleries responding to that?
One, we always speak about an ecosystem. Now, this art ecosystem consists of the curators, art historians, gallerists, and museums. Because my understanding is that these are the people that determines or that have the role to play in cultural broking. Meaning that if, for instance, let me use an example. So these are the people that in a way can determine the value of an artwork or the value of an artist's name. Because if a certain critic who sits with a gallerist, and then you've got a museum director, and then they have a kind of an influence in how then that museum acquires the work, or how the art historian can be able to write something about this artist. And then that also has got a ripple effect in terms of the value then of the artist.
And just in terms of value, will you talk a little bit about your work and why you founded the Black Collectors Forum? Why was that necessary, and how are you approaching value, right, and the relationship between the object and the people who make the objects?
We started Black Collectors Forum out of a need, or rather a necessity, of seeing most of Black people not going to galleries or museums. Mm-hmm. And also it was because of seeing the impact of about 3.5 decades of cultural isolation or cultural boycott, which was imposed to South Africa. That impact had it numbed aesthetic and cultural sensibilities of the majority of Black people in the country. But also coming from South Africa, just had emerged from an institutionalized and structural racism. Black people, I mean, I use the word Black in relation to those that were on the margins. So we thought it is our role that we do not, we need to come up with something, because what we saw is that in all of these talk programs, no one spoke about new audiences. Okay, the academia was much more interested on some issues, and then the gallerists were interested in selling. And then the biggest buyer within the South African context was the white market. Yeah. And the artists were mainly Black artists who were in a way of making art that was dealing with Black issues. So we thought, and also because in South Africa, the art world is opaque, and the white cube can be intimidating for a lot of people. So we thought, let's do something. Let's invite people and talk about art outside of the white cube, and so explain to them and using a language that they can understand, not in profundity, not the language that is used in art catalogs, which sort of confuses people. Now, when we started this forum, it was such a learning curve, because we realized that here we're dealing with a society that is hemorrhaging, or a market that is hemorrhaging, because we had to start explaining. Let me use an example. If you talk about works on paper, or you talk about a photograph, people ask you questions that, what's the difference between this photograph and the one that I have to go and print in the 1-hour shop? So we had to start by explaining archival paper, blah, 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 blah. So that was the reason, because there was a void.
Yes. Yes. To sort of partner with you there, you know, the New Orleans African American Museum, for those who are unfamiliar with our work, is situated on a 2-acre campus right out 4 blocks from the French Quarter. It's historic property in that the street that we're on is a 5,000-year-old Chittamatra, which is an indigenous trail. The main house, the main Malora Villa, was a house that was owned by a black woman in the 1800s. And so it's not sort of the traditional white cube large space. It's a series of historic houses. And so even just that relationship to entering into a house to see and experience culture and art, we have found is a different experience for our audience. And so it makes it more accessible just by the mere fact that it is a house. Some of the things that we've had to contend with in New Orleans are the fact that culture really is born in the streets. It bubbles up literally in the streets, right? With our processional second lines and funeral jazz, our jazz funerals, as well as our, you know, just other cultural sort of iconography. It all happens publicly. And so institutions then sort of extract that and interpret it and reposition it and sort of present it. And so our job as an institution now is to really push back against sort of the origins of museums, which was to extract the culture from place and people and recontextualize it, that we are really, in many ways, sort of repatriating culture and creating a bridge between those who create and treating them well and being much more transparent in how museums work and operate, and the community from which that work comes from. Can you all talk a little bit about, are there spaces, physical spaces, maybe more informal spaces that are doing that work? And how are they sustaining themselves, you know, in a global economy? Are they able to sort of support artists? Are they negotiating new ways of working with artists? What are your thoughts on that? And I'd love to hear from all of you, because I think you're each touching on various aspects of artist-centered work. I love our panels thinking about that. And hopefully
okay, I can just add a little bit. One, again, I always like to go back to a bit of art history, and in the sense that philanthropy, unlike in sort of matured environments like North America or Europe, where you've got a long history of philanthropy, within, I don't know, but within the Black communities, it is something that is fairly new, but which is growing at a fast pace. Yeah. An example that I'm going to use. So deep-pocketed people, or people that have means, like the late Angolan collector, Sidika Donkolo. So Sidika Donkolo played that role where he would invite, where he had a curator next to him, Alvim, and then invite people, okay? But this was informed sort of way to invite artists, to invite art historians, to invite writers within the African and diaspora, so that they can be able to try some of these issues and offer a platform. So the role then of that platform, because it was coming from a very philanthropy.
Yes. So
he supported in that sense. And then you do have other institutions that started like that. Like, for instance, CCA in Lagos. It started more or less like that. Or the one that started raw material. So you do have these, or within a South African, there was, I just forgot the name, that was started by Gabi Ngobo. So these platforms.
The NPO.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So sort of these platforms are conduits. Again, I'm going to use the South African context. There are conduits to the gap that was left behind because institutions in South Africa were only catering for white audiences. So, and then, but post-1994, the same institutions started treating the new aesthetic, the post-apartheid aesthetic, as if it's a one wholesome, whereas the art production was coming from different isolated spaces. So in a way, those platforms like the one that Gabi and others started helped in understanding where we come from and where we're heading.
Yeah.
And these spaces were operated by people out of their own, because we didn't have that kind of support in South Africa where there's support from the corporations. I'm not going to mention the government, but people still did because it was a labor of love.
I'd love to hear what you all have to say, and you actually just led me into another question that I have, but I'd love to hear what you all have to say about just the evolution of the support.
I mean, you know, like as a young curator and artist, you know, my experience has kind of
So let's see. I think you all dropped out. Are you there?
Yes, I can hear now.
Yes.
I'm here.
Sanjani, I think, is out. Tuli, are you
I'm
there?
here. I can...
Okay, excellent.
No,
you all
here.
are frozen, so feel free. Okay, great. Would you like to go ahead and jump in? Because I'd love to hear, again, you've got this multidisciplinary practice, and we'll wait for them to jump back in.
Okay, I don't know who's speaking. I can hear. Can you hear me on the other side?
Yeah, this is Gia.
I can hear you.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Excellent.
Perfect. You know, when I grew up in the 80s, which wasn't so long ago, I think my first introduction into the work of Black artists was through Katlehong Art Center, which was a community-based organization, you know, that serviced Black artists. And of course, there were quite a number of them, like your Lutheran Mission, which was called the Rocket's Drift, where artists like Semtleng Etwa came from, and David Kolwan, and many of the much older Black artists, and including Helen Sibidi and Bongi Dlomo, you know, because I think up until we come to the 90s, early 90s, you know, there's so few Black women artists that were visibly working. And of course, the number has quadrupled. I hope there's more in this country. But I think also something that I think was quite tragic with the uplifting of the cultural boycott is the death of community art centers. You know, art centers that catered for people who otherwise were not interested in academia, you know, in pursuing art through the university channels, like some of us did. You know, they were all over the country at one point. I think probably more than 20. You know, produced fantastic artists, fantastic artists. Just didn't survive when the cultural boycott was lifted and more Black artists had access to universities.
Kensani, were these programs defunded?
I think to a large extent, yes, because one of the reasons why they were funded was because the government at the time, before Mandela, wouldn't support Black arts, you know, felt that there was no need for it to have Black artists. Because you must remember that visual imagery and art is very important in constructing the nation, you know, and the kind of nation that was constructed in and then South Africa was very wide, very Calvinist, very patriarchal, that artists whose work didn't feed into that white male patriarchy were not needed by the system, you know, because then you find quite a lot of probably what I would loosely call when I teach state art, where artists did monuments. There were a lot of monuments in this country to the previous government, you know, in museums, statues, panels in railway stations, a lot of public art, a lot of artists commissioned for this government. That when this ends, when Mandela comes out and universities open up, then people who were funding community art centers just saw no need to continue doing so. And subsequently, they fell apart, a lot of them, actually most of them. Only very few survive, and survive terribly. So we seem to have this gap now where a lot of artists feel the need to go to university if they want to access the mainstream or go to whichever few community art centers that exist in the country.
So that makes me think a little bit about those kind of liminal spaces that exist. Where are those pockets of resistance? Do you feel like that's the sort of trajectory of emerging artists in South Africa is sort of through academia, using it as a tool, or are there also other collectives that are pushing back, and sort of resisting traditional mainstream education as a means to enter the market, so to speak?
I think artists that work on the fringes, who work on fringe festivals of major art fairs, would probably then occupy the space that you're talking about. And because a lot of people that come to visit South Africa, would come to the Big Five galleries, who obviously travel to art fairs all over the world. That you find very few curators who dig beyond those 5 major contemporary galleries, and try and meet other artists that are working in small collectives in other spaces. I think the collective way of working as artists, collectives, there's so few of them. There's so few of them in this country that I don't know one that is actively and visibly working that collective. I think that also the nature of the market, forces one to look after themselves and look out for themselves, that it doesn't really, especially for the ones that are academically trained, whose aspiration is having a gallery here, a gallery abroad, and certainly a lot of the work of South African artists gets purchased abroad. That a lot of us, our market is outside of the continent.
Yeah.
I would like to add on what Tenzeni is saying. I think, again, looking within the broader art landscape in South Africa, before the end of apartheid, we had the so-called township artists, or to use the derogatory term that were called township artists. Most of them were not university trained. They were autodidactic, but you had places like Johannesburg Art Foundation, you had, as Tenzeni has mentioned, Rock's Drift, you had Police Street Art Center, and all of those spaces, which in a way were started or led by white Europeans, to impart some. So most of the black artists that were emanating from those spaces, their understanding of art was, most of them did art, not all of them, some to survive.
Yeah. Sort
of pandering to the market, which was dominantly white. That in a way, and then when you fast forward to post-1994, you had artists that were now trained, that were coming from university. And as Tenzeni is rightfully saying, that whose work were inspired by the Western art history. Because, in South Africa, we didn't have a sort of a black South African art history. So they sort of appealed to the Western, it made sense post-art, because now their work was unlike the work of the artists before 1994, whose work was much more overtly political or carried a certain aesthetic that sort of appealed to the tourist. Now, the academically trained artists then also brought a new kind of aesthetic. They brought video art onto the space. They brought in conceptual art. They brought in installations. which in a South African, again, these are the kind of works or that appeals to matured markets like Europe. So yes, I agree with Senzeni that you had autodidactic artists, which had a certain kind of a centrality in terms of their subject matter. And then post-1994, you had academically trained artists who had a broader understanding of the art market, and who had a better understanding of the Western art history.
And so that makes me think, Thuli, in your work with Ujamaa, how do you situate that work in terms of the gap, right? So we're identifying, in South Africa, there's a gap. I would actually argue, in the sort of diasporic community that there's a gap, right? In general, and that we're all sort of in relationship to this gap. Where does Ujamaa fit in providing sort of resources and operating in between these sort of spaces of artist-centered communities, institutions, the market, and then the sort of world of resistance?
So far, what I have done, because of my background, having worked for the Back Factory Artist Studios, is I'm focusing on giving artists, emerging artists, a platform. Mm-hmm. And those that have, or some of them are not interested in signing up with galleries, and those that have probably been with galleries, but due to the pandemic, things have closed down. So my coming into the industry is to sort of give the artists who've not had a voice, to give them a voice and also a platform. Mm-hmm. And it's also not about academically trained or those that are academically trained. It's just giving artists a platform and giving them a voice and exposure both within and out of Africa.
So when I think about exposure in the arts ecosystem, I also think about, again, kind of the curatorial practice of framing and the sort of critic's purpose, right, which is to give us also a platform, especially for artists, to evolve their practice through critique. Where is it that you all are seeing that happen in those arts ecosystems, right? Is there sort of a pathway for young critics and writers to come up and to actually give feedback? I can say in New Orleans, we talk a lot about the fact that, if you make work and you're a Black artist, right, part of the community is there to celebrate. And so we need more spaces for critique and for true kind of critical discourse. Where are those spaces in South Africa?
I think we do lack the spaces.
Yeah,
we don't have the platform.
Honestly,
there's not much.
It's not easy. I think, I will personally say, it's a very nepotistic industry because it's a small industry, so I don't want to run into somebody that doesn't like my work. Yeah. The same place that we're partying at, kind of thing, So I've seen a lot of toxic positivity within the art world, where because of the struggles that we've been through, and because some of us are outsider artists, we feel like a knock on our practice, if I knock your practice, through critique, it could destroy your career, which could be devastating, in a big way, where people don't receive your work in a, so, and I think that's wrong. I think we need a contemporary criticism, that's less from a spectator's kind of perspective, but from a meditator's kind of perspective, if you understand what I mean.
Absolutely.
There's the spectator and then there's the meditator. So if you look at, there's two ways of looking at an artwork from my perspective as a critic, in contemporary criticism. It's either you're a spectator and that's the point of departure that you're commenting from, or a meditator, which is a more sort of a personal, less formal, less subjective, less colonial library informed perspective, which I'm more interested in, and I'd like to see more practitioners kind of work from, you know, as the direction.
And I'm wondering from you all if, because I'd love for others to sort of also chime in, are there informal spaces that are offering that opportunity? I mean, I think I would kind of insert that I think artists oftentimes do this for and with each other, right? In informal spaces, in particular residencies, are great spaces to get feedback about the evolution of your practice and your work. Are there other spaces that maybe are less formal, like salons that happen? And again, going back, Tuli, to your work and just, you know, you saying like your entry point into this world, right? Like specifically just sort of creating spaces where you could have conversations.
There are spaces that also have been in existence, like previously I used to work for the Back Factory Artist Studios. Although it's formalized, but there are spaces like that and Argus House.
Yeah, A4, August House.
K-Town. And then Argus House, which is a residency and studio space, which came 10 or 15 years after the Back Factory. The Back Factory, which is an institution I work for, which has been in existence for about 26 years.
I would like to add on something.
Yeah.
Talking about art criticism. Art criticism is very important to develop and strengthen a certain aesthetic that emanates from a certain society. So what we see now currently in South Africa is the advent of private museums. And these private museums like Zeitmoka, Javits Art Center, Novel Foundation, Johannesburg Contemporary Art Foundation, they came from after the death of philanthropy, because the owners of the spaces were the people that used to contribute or donate art or donate funds to the museums, civic museums and all of that. So now criticism, because art now is happening mostly in these spaces. So criticism, because again in South Africa, the world of art is still in the clutches of white modernity. So criticism is going to come from white publishers who seem to ignore the saloon or independent or alternative spaces until one or two of artists that emanate from those spaces start making a name. You know, like the same thing as the Ladysmith Black Mambazo complex, where if someone comes out of it, then everyone just sort of takes it and run with it. So that is why there's not much art criticism, because also we do not have mainstream approach papers that have got designated art critics. Yeah. So art critics are either coming from the University of Witwatersrand, Wits University, or they're coming from Michaelis in Cape Town, University of Cape Town. And these are all attached to all of the spaces. Wits and UCT or Novel or Zeitmoka. So yes, criticism is coming from a very, very narrow perspective, and it's not spread out into other alternative spaces or those or marginal spaces.
And just thinking about those other spaces, what are some of the more traditional kind of cultural art forms, and how are they making their way into contemporary practice? So what does that sort of journey look like? And for those of us who may be unfamiliar with more traditional South African cultural practices, what are they? And who are you all seeing that are kind of bridging the gap between that intergenerational world?
In my take, I mean, I don't know what other people think. So what has happened is that in a way, the Black Lives Matter movement had an impact globally. We're beginning to see some of these institutions, the museums and so on, having more and more Black female curators and directors.
Yes.
That has got a positive impact now in terms of how art is presented. The issues of presentation have now taken a center stage because we're beginning to hear new voices. We're beginning to see new writing. So, yes, some of these spaces, yes, there is a relevance to them. By that, that there are new, young, I mean, in South Africa, you see now, I mean, you've got Standard Bank, that has got a female black curator, a head curator, you've got Javet's Art Center, I mean, I think there's Koyo in Zeitsmoker. So all of these developments are having a positive impact in how we see or engage with art in South Africa right now.
Excellent. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, like there isn't like an elan vital to the industry. I mean, I was working for a Black-owned gallery, you know, that started in the inner city and sort of moved to like Keys Art Mile, which is where most art galleries, I think, like Anita mentioned, the Big Five, is sort of situated, you know, and this space was started by a queer individual, you know, that like largely focused on elevating a Black woman and queer artists within the art space. So there is like a vitality, you know, like to echo what Andile is saying, you know, that's re-emerging. You know, I just think there's a gap between, you know, the academy, you know, because the academy moves at a slower rate than gallery sort of spaces, you know. So there's that gap, the critical gap, the academic gap. But I think right now there is a vitality within the museum and the gallery space and where art is displayed. You know, we just need a stronger mantle for the academy and the critical media space. Yeah, that would be my opinion on the situation.
Other thoughts? Tuli, I see you are kind of look like you're in deeper contemplation there. I'm sure that's a part of your everyday process, right? Like as you're doing your work.
Yeah, my everyday process is a bit different because I came into the industry when I left the institution, and I started out, I wanted to do something totally different, you know? I wanted to focus on different forms of visual art from your graffiti artists, and I wanted to offer what your usual spaces don't offer, you know, something totally different, from performative art to your graffiti artists. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does. It does. I'm just thinking about, you know, as we sort of round out our conversation, if you would each just like take a moment to think about what would you say is sort of the largest challenge, right? And I think you each sort of touched on it, but if you could crystallize it, and then what would you say is the biggest opportunity for both South African artists, but the sort of South African ecosystem? And I'd love it if each of you could share your thoughts on that.
For me,
I think before we can continue, I would like to say, if Senzeni, for instance, because Senzeni is involved in education, and I think education is very, very important in us moving forward, so that you have a generation that is fully equipped politically and otherwise about the history where we come from. Because we need also, because what education does, it looks at how the one-time segregated culture can move now into a singular whole. So maybe Senzeni can tell us a little bit about, she's been involved quite a lot in terms of community education, and also through her artistic practice, when she did, Theodora come to Johannesburg from Jim come to Joburg. I think Senzeni this moment can give us a bit of an insight.
Okay, I'll do that. You know, I initially arrived here in Soweto to come and teach art in a high school. So those would be children between the ages of 13 to 18. And then I discovered very quickly that in a space, because now Soweto is quite vast, almost 5 million people that live in Soweto, only one high school offers visual art in the entire Soweto, servicing over 1 million teenagers. One art school, okay? And then one thinks, this is now 2014, 15 when I was there. that, you know, because there's been so much effort that the government says it makes, you know, through initiatives like the Mzansi Golden Economy, where it has realized that the creative industry brings a lot of cultural revenue into the country. Why there were so few schools offering art to Black students? You know, because if you go to schools in more affluent and wealthier suburbs, everyone can do art if they want, you know, and I think even those that don't, they have access to so much information. You know, schools make effort to visit galleries, museums, major shows. And I left that school, of course, you know, after some time, because I became interested in my own practice, and it was also quite difficult to carry my performance work because I wore the same dress for 6 years doing the performance. It was hard to carry it, you know, because I'd have to walk to the school and have to deal with ridicule and questions and what have you. Not that I was intimidated by it, but I didn't want to have to answer every day to what I was doing. To moving around artists here in Soweto that are in are trying to work in whatever was left of your Mfulo Art Center, which was a formerly community art center, to Funda Art Center, where almost nothing happens there anymore. You know, so that's a completely different system here in Soweto, where probably the white cube is almost non-existent for them, you know, because galleries still won't take them on. So you have these layers of art practitioners in this country. You know, those that are largely academically trained, which you would find in the big 5 galleries, to much more artists who are trained from community art centers who are still here, don't have much opportunities to get out and show their work all over the world. Arts education needs a lot of intervention. You know, I think it's also something that makes me remain in Soweto. I still have contact with the teachers of that one high school in the whole of Soweto that offers visual art. You know, that before COVID happened, I was trying to get the students out to art fairs, but I did get them to 2 art fairs. You know, and try and get material in there and try to get artists to go and visit so that at least we can keep that one high school art department alive. You know, and begin. So, and of course, you know, the process of trying to educate people. I think even my own immediate family about the industry, what one does and what it means in the greater context of cultural production in this country has not been an easy journey.
Absolutely. I think about the sort of art vocabulary that most citizens lack because, you know, we don't have art and education. And so there is a sort of gap, and there's an intimidation about speaking, in particular about visual arts.
Yes.
So as you're thinking about an opportunity, would you say the challenge is also the opportunity, or do you see that there's a greater or bigger opportunity for the arts ecosystem, the art world in South Africa?
You know, I think for me, one of the most exciting things is the availability of the internet. You know, and it's growing rapidly here in Soweto, even though we're still struggling with it. That young people, I've seen it because I've just come off teaching in a block at a university now, that, you know, they have access to so much that, you know, anything that you tell them or suggest, they quickly go to their phones and Google while they're in class, you know. So the learning pace is a lot faster, you know, and also the curiosity to discover things outside of the excesses of their own lives, because the internet can be too much sometimes, you know, and have like too much information that one has to thrift through. But I'm happy that we are in a space where a lot of Black people in this country have access to internet, no matter how expensive it is. That internet provides a channel for a new way of spreading information. You know, for new conversations, you know, and I think one of the great things about art, it's largely visual, you know, so I think probably 10 years from now, with a rising amount of artists, even art students are online now in this country. I've certainly been following the ones that I've been teaching. you know, and they're showing work, then probably the conversation would be different in 10 years from now.
Absolutely.
And the language would have developed a bit more because people have access to so much.
Absolutely. And I'm
Well,
hoping
we'll
that
have
that means,
access to quite,
I hope that that means greater cultural exchanges, right? Where we have the opportunity to explore the diaspora. We have the opportunity to really sort of connect around both our sort of shared experiences and the things that make our local sort of places different and unique. So yeah, I agree. I think we have time for our last two panelists just to share sort of biggest challenges
I would like to.
And opportunities.
I would like to. So this is what I would like to say, because this is an art fair platform.
Yes.
My concern about these developments, about the reception of Black artists, whether in Africa or diaspora, is there is this where the works of Black artists they're being speculated. We see them being consumed or acquired by speculators instead of these works ending up in scholarly or encyclopedic collections within universities. That's the same thing that is happening in South Africa. Yeah. These artists, as Senzeni is saying, that the role of the internet. Yes, a lot of people can see them on the internet, but they do not end up being critically reviewed.
Yes.
They become vogue, popular, and then speculators, because those are the biggest consumers of art in South Africa. Okay, that is why you see that the secondary market is bigger than in terms of the sales, and these, except the big five that fit into the secondary market in South Africa. So even we've seen recently the works of one of the great female artists, which was recently on the Philips auction, where someone had bought it at a fraction of the price, and then put it back on the secondary market.
Yes.
So there is a way, because we do not have a strong Black art buying market. So Black artists are vulnerable to the vagaries of the market, and that undermines their careers, especially young or emerging artists.
Yeah, I think you just described that kind of double-edged sword of using these digital platforms, right, as a means for accessibility, and the fact that, you know, we are taking in or consuming the visuals in these sort of bite-sized, digestible chunks. Those of us who have the language might explore a bit deeper and be a bit more robust, but many folks are still kind of just consuming the soundbite, right? And what are all of the sort of nuances that you miss when that is the way that you consume? So I think you're right. I think that we have to continue to evaluate where we are and how we have more access and more control over our cultural production and the way in which others are consuming it. Our last two panelists, I'm just curious, what is the biggest sort of challenge and biggest sort of opportunity that you both see as we round out our conversation?
You can start, or I'll start.
I find the challenge is trying to get our South Africans to understand, especially like Andile has mentioned before, like how he started his organization, Black Art Forum, or the Art Collectors Forum, is trying to get the people of color to understand the value of art. That's an issue that I have, as well as trying to get as much funding as possible from the government, you know. Those are my contentious issues I have in the arts. And it's very, somehow it doesn't sit well with me, with the fact that in this day and time, we are trying to sell African art outside of Africa. So which means we're taking it out of the country again, which has been happening for centuries, you know. So all the valuable artists and artworks is not kept in the country, always has to leave our country. That's an issue, that's a contentious issue.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say the challenge is sort of the prejudicial projection that artists have like on themselves. Sort of like the domineering market is sort of like the traditional market, you know, from my perspective. So sort of like durational works, performance-based works, those are like still on the periphery.
Yes.
You know, like when I visit European countries, I see how like those mediums can be the center. So I think for me, that would be my own personal challenge, and sort of like centering those would be great. And I would say the opportunity is the access that we've gotten via the internet. I mean, look at us, all of us now, you know, we're like having a conversation from across the world.
Yes.
That is a huge opportunity, you know, and I think we could use that opportunity more.
Yes.
By doing more of these panels. And it's also like incredibly archival. It's not like a seminar that happens at some hall that has huge challenges of sort of like archiving because you have to get cameras and etc. You know, this is great because we can record it and keep it on the internet and somebody can come and access this. So I think that's the opportunity that we have, you know, a space for dialogue that's archivable. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to just take an opportunity to thank each of you. You all are, again, on the sort of tip of the global south, and so I don't know whether or not it is very late or very early, but I want to thank each of you for making time to have this conversation today, to really engage our viewers who are here attending Prizm for Miami Art Week. We've, of course, like to thank Prizm for sponsoring and putting together this an incredible virtual series that allows, you know, those who could not be in Miami this week to participate, right? To feel like they are engaged in this subject matter. And of course, I'd like to just thank all of our supporters at the New Orleans African American Museum for allowing us to be here in person. And we look forward to both those sort of digital experiences and those in-person experiences. And I'd like to turn it back over to the executive director, Mikhail Solomon, and just say thank you so much for having us today. And I hope to keep the conversation going with each one of you and the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Gia, and I echo your sentiments. I thank Andiles and Zeni and Kinsani and Tuli for joining us from the opposite side of the globe today. And I want to thank all of our folks who are on Zoom as well as here in person listening on our conversation. And I also want to thank our event partners, the Green Foundation, Green Family Foundation, the Knight Foundation, the Miami-Dade Department of Cultural Affairs, Florida Division of Cultural Affairs, Dashboard, and the Greater Miami Visitors and Convention Bureau. We will be back with our next panel in about 5 minutes. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, well.